Now, this is really important to talk about because it isn't just your normal industrial sphere, truckies. In many cases, you see negotiations between workers and employers. And if you're not directly involved in that particular part of the world, that particular sector, well, you look at it at arm's length, don't you? But trucking, I think, is very, very different because we have to share the road with them. And if they have an accident, well, there's a good chance that they're going to take a few other people out as well. The Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal has approved minimum payments for long-distance drivers. And the trucking industry is a bit complicated, you'd have to say, on this when it comes to this, because you get the employees who get an hourly rate, the same as anyone who's got a job, and then you get the owner drivers, and it's the owner drivers who I've spoken to in the past who have had unrealistic and unfair pressure put on them by companies, including the major supermarkets, and in doing so, they're being put under pressure, and that puts everybody at danger. The Australian Industry Group's concerned the move will put extra cost on the supply chain. And in my mind, if that's what it takes to address a very long overdue issue, then so be it. We might have to pay a little bit extra in our shops and so on. But as long as that burden is evenly applied, then surely that's worth it. 131873. I'd like to hear from the truckies as we go throughout the afternoon. Well, from 2 wheels to 4 to, well, probably about 18 or so, I guess, a decision to introduce mandatory minimum payments for many truck drivers has been met by criticism by businesses, saying the move will increase costs and jeopardise the visibility or viability of road transport companies. Now, the ruling comes at an important time, Christmas putting truckies under greater pressure, and deaths in trucks-related crashes increasing as well. In fact, in the past 5 weeks, 19 people have been killed in truck-related accidents around the country. In a ruling hailed by unions as a world first, the Transport Workers Union has welcomed a major boost for safety in trucking with a ruling on minimum safe rates for owner drivers. And Michael Kane is the Acting National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union. Thanks for your time, Michael.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Warren.
Well, do you think this will overcome the problem? I know when I've raised this issue from time to time over the years that the owner drivers say they've had undue pressure or unfair pressure on them from major companies such as the supermarket chains.
Well, look, I think it most certainly will. This is a landmark ruling. In fact, Warren, it's a world first. We've got owner drivers, they're independent contractors, they're small businesses, and for years they've been under this intense pressure to work too long, to work too fast, simply to make a living, to keep their heads above water. And that, as you say, is largely because of the pressures that come from the very top of transport supply chains, from the likes of the major retailers and the manufacturers, because they've just been squeezing every last dollar out of the companies that they use. And it's those companies that use owner drivers, and the owner drivers are really bearing the brunt of it. But not only the owner drivers, Warren.
Yeah.
Of course, when something goes wrong on the road, as you've said, actually, that toll's now up to 21 because we've lost another 2 on the weekend.
Oh, really?
But when something goes wrong for owner drivers in these rigs, of course, it's the general road-using community that's in real danger. So this is a real step forward.
Yeah, well, that's why I've been concerned about it, because normally with industrial disputes, if you're not involved in that sector, you can watch them at arm's length almost and go, well, that doesn't affect me. But in this particular case, what happens on our roads affects all of us, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. When you're in your car over the Christmas break and you see a truck behind you in the rear vision mirror, what you want to know is you want to have the confidence that that driver's rested, that they're properly trained, that they're being paid enough so that they're not feeling pressure to make a deadline or pressure to keep the wheels turning around. So this is an important decision because it says that for the first time that owner drivers are to be paid for every hour that they work. And I mean, I know that sounds logical, and it sounds as if it should be happening already, but it hasn't been.
So they've been paid for the job from getting, say, from Brisbane to Melbourne, hypothetically, and not paid for how long it takes to get from Brisbane to Melbourne.
That's right. The tradition has been, and it's been a tragic one, really, that they're paid for the time the wheels turn around. They're paid by the kilometre. So if they end up working, as is common, waiting 3 or 4 or 5 hours at a distribution centre of a major retailer, for example.
Yep.
Those hours are unpaid, and of course then the payment they get has got to be averaged out over those hours, and that means that drivers are just having to do the extra load, go that little bit quicker, feel that extra pressure just to keep their heads above water. And this is a ruling which should go a long way to lifting some of those pressures.
So is there still going to be a concern, though, that the pressure will be maintained in as much as a major retailer may say that if you're not willing to get our load from Brisbane to Melbourne in, 20 hours or 24 hours, whatever the absolute possible fast speed you could do is, if you can't do that, then we're not interested in using you? We'll use someone who will go through without a break or whatever the case may be?
It's a really important point that you make, the pressure from the top of the supply chain. The really important thing about the body that's made this ruling, which is a bit of a mouthful, the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal.
Yeah, I must admit it's a body I haven't heard much of.
Yeah, it's a body that was put in place by the Gillard government in 2012, and it has an important power, and that is it can make rulings that are binding on those at the top of the supply chain, such as the major retailers, and that's precisely what the body has done on this occasion. So those retailers now have an obligation to ensure that the rates that have been put in place are actually paid to the owner-drivers. So for the first time, they become part of the mix, and it remains to be seen how that plays out, Warren, but it really goes to that point that you've made, that we really have to get to the top of the chain to get those pressures lifted. What
about the other side of the equation? And that's industry saying that this is going to add to cost and ultimately add to costs to the consumer?
Well, there's two things about that. The first thing is that I don't think any Australian wants a situation where a driver who's paid for their own rig and has chosen to contribute to Australian working life as a small business, that they should be forced to be on the road and receive less than cost recovery for their business, because Australians know that that's a deadly recipe. But the second thing is what we've just spoken about, Warren, and that is this is a unique decision because it should actually help industry and help transport operators, because those at the top of the chain are going to have to, for the first time, cough up and pay their fair share. So we think that this is going to make a sustainable and safer industry as it all plays out.
Okay, thanks for your time. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Warren.
Acting National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union, that is Michael Cain, and that is an issue that I'm glad to see addressed. I'm not 100% sure it will solve the problem across the board, because there still will be that pressure between competition, really competition between owner-drivers for the job. And big business can obviously prey on that. But I keep saying this, it is one sector or one industrial area where you can't view it at arm's length. If there's an argument between shop assistants and the supermarkets, or an argument against hospitality workers and cafes or whatever, well, we can go, if you want to be tough, that's their problem. But how our roads are used, and particularly when you're talking about trucks, and particularly when you're talking about driver fatigue, and particularly when you're talking about 21 people killed in the last 5 weeks, well, that's a major issue for us all, isn't it? 131873.